Hebrews chapter 11, and we're only going to look at one verse tonight. And I was just checking there if I've got the right verse. Yes, I have. Verse 30, because he did finish off last week with the drowning Egyptians, I hope. You know, the Red Sea being parted, so on. But this week, just verse 30. Ralph, would you read that, please?
Sure.
Yeah.
By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days.
Super. Okay. Let's look at the account, shall we? Let's look at what happened. Joshua chapter 6 and verses 3 to 5. Joshua fit the battle, Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. Do you remember that song? You know that one? Okay, so from verse 3 we read, this is the command of the Lord, and ye shall compass the city, all ye men of war, and go round about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets. And it shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when ye hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat, and the people shall ascend up every man straight before him. So that was the clear plan, and it came to pass. It worked. How did it work? Well, we're going to look at that shortly, but I did just want to run by you the extent of this fortress, this Jericho. Jericho was surrounded by a rampart. You know what a rampart? Yeah? Do you know what a rampart is? Okay, well if it's... so it was built basically on a mound. They call it a mound, or sometimes they call it a tell, T-E-double-L. And that sort of slant up towards the top of the mound, that slant is called a rampart, okay, and at the bottom they had a wall called a retaining wall, okay, and that retaining wall itself had a wall on top of it. So, the retaining wall, I think, around for many feet, but the actual wall on top of that was 15 foot high, and then when you get to the top of the rampart, the crescent, you have yet another wall, which from the ground level would take you to about 50 foot high. So Jericho isn't just, you know, a town surrounded by a pilly little wall. It's something to behold. It would be like looking up and seeing this fortress, this bastion, and like, how on earth are we going to get through that? It is, to all intents and purposes, impregnable. Okay? And then, on top of this, we've got this command to sort of walk around it. I mean, what's that going to do? You know, toddling around the city wall and then shouting at the end of it and blowing some horns. That is not really, on the face of it, going to get you to overthrow and penetrate such a stronghold, such a great fortress. Or is it? Of course it does. And the point is that it's not the horns that did it, it's not the shouting that did it, it's not the walking around that did it. What did it was God, or who did it was God. And did you notice it does mention in Joshua 6, if you go back to verse 4, what are the priests bearing? Sorry, what the priests are bearing trumpets before what? Yeah, exactly. Before the ark. Okay? And in verse 13, first part, says the same thing as it happens. You know, God says it, this is exactly what they do. And 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord went on continually. See that? Mm-hmm. And in verse 16, and it came to pass at the 7th time, when the priests blew with the trumpets, Joshua said unto the people, shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. Okay, so the ark was present, signifying the presence of the Lord. Yeah? Who was doing the overthrowing? God. And they knew it, because in verse 16 they shout, the Lord has given this city to us. Now, why do I go through that in that order? Because that is the order, the formula that we need to keep in mind as we walk on in our Christian walk. And the formula is this: grace, faith, obedience. Grace, faith, obedience. I think it's the magic formula, okay? And I'll tell you why. Jesus, oh yes, have faith. Oh yes, repent. But he also says, be baptized. Take, eat, this is my body. Men ought always to pray and not to faint. There's doing, not just thinking. You're asked to do something, not just to think something. That's what faith is. It does seem that God absolutely wants you to trust him, but part of that same trust is an active faith that demonstrates the reality of true faith and trust in the Creator. Obedience is faith visible, faith acting, faith manifest. Obedience is the only reality. I'm quoting J.C. Ryle. It's a good one, isn't it? Faith visible, faith acting, faith manifest is obedience. Okay, so are you doing that, or am I doing that? Are you actually obeying God at the moment? Is there anything outstanding that we've even mentioned there that needs to be done to obey? Because obedience isn't just something that's given to us to prove our faith. It's given to us because, back to the formula, it's a means of grace to us. It's, yes, starts with grace and go on and obey, but actually by obeying we also get more grace. It's grace upon grace. That's why in the Wesleyan tradition we talk about the means of grace. We say, please don't see it as a work that you have to get up off your chair at the church, walk to the front, take the bread and drink the wine. Ooh, what a chore. Oh, is this works that I'm having to do here? No, this is a means of grace to you, and it's obedience. And if you do it, I'll tell you what, you'll feel great for doing it. You will experience the presence of God. Surely you noticed on Sunday just gone the presence of God. I certainly did, and I've missed communion for a while, and I have to say that afternoon, and I'm not being superstitious, or I'm not using confirmation bias here. I felt lifted by that experience of obedience. Yeah, you do it and you're blessed for it. Grace, faith, obedience. So going back to Jericho then, grace, that was God's power. That Jericho, God's power would, he was saying, see Jericho overthrown. The faith was that the Israelites, as we read in those few verses, trusted in the promise. Yeah? And the obedience was that they marched around Jericho, blew the horns, and shouted. Okay, that's the formula. Now you might think, hang on a minute, this is your formula, Matthew. Wrong. I think I found a scripture which demonstrates this formula. Now I'm not saying that one necessarily has to follow the other, in that order, but they all seem to work together. And I think it's nicely encapsulated in Romans chapter 1 and verse 5. And Paul writes, by whom we have received grace and apostleship for obedience to the faith among all nations for his name. Mm. You've got all three there, haven't you? Grace, obedience, and faith. By grace, obedience to the faith. I bring this up as well because we've commemorated or remembered or celebrated even the Reformation, and we know the formula there is faith alone. But if, as we said in times past, and let's quote him again, Luther says, but not by faith that is alone. All right? Not by faith that is alone. It isn't merely intellectual. That is what James argues against in his letter. It isn't intellectual, because if it were, well, the demons would be saved, but they're not. They tremble or shudder, or whatever the translation you choose. Okay? So, I'll tell you what's helpful as well about remembering this formula of grace, faith and obedience. On Sunday, Paul spoke about legalism or Phariseeism. And that is something to be careful of. And I think when you are obedient and faithful, but remember it's by grace, then you won't become proud. You won't think it's me that's doing this. No, remember it's by grace. And similarly, we know we're meant to be faithful and obedient, but you won't become weary in doing good, because that's another. So not just the legalism over here, but the other one is being weary, being tired, having enough, I can't do it. You won't get to that stage because it's by grace. You see? You come back to the formula. When you think about it, if things are, and we are apt to do one of these, stop and think, what am I missing here? Am I missing grace actually? then I need to pray and get right, and put it right. And I think as well, if you remember this formula of grace, giving you this faithful obedience, then look what happens when you start to consider the commandments of God. I'll repeat that. Look what happens when you begin to consider the commandments of God. So let's look at some commandments. Let's go to Exodus. I think generally we're all on the same page in terms of our understanding of the Ten Commandments. The moral law, that we need to be obedient there. And if you look at chapter 23 of Exodus, and starting in verse... have I got 23? Oh, I've got the wrong one there.
20.
That's 20. Yes, thank you, 20. Chapter 20. If we start in verse... Well, I've got 3. We don't have to read it all, but I want you to note what I am emphasizing, okay? Starting verse 3. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Verse 5. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. Verse 7. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Verse 10. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work. Now, did you spot what I was emphasizing? Of course you did. Thou shalt not. Okay. Now, to the unregenerate, they see a commandment. Thou shalt not. Okay. But actually, let's put it a different way. Let's, by the art of intonation, let me say those words again and preface them as follows. By the grace of God, thou shalt not. See the difference? It's not just a command, it's a promise, isn't it? By the grace of God, thou shalt not. Thou shalt love thy Lord, thy God. Thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself. You can do it by grace. That's where what it's founded upon, isn't it? We said it before, you can't do anything without grace, can you? Without me you can do nothing at all, Christ said. And then finally I just wanted to talk about the obedience factor. This encircling of the city and so forth. Well, it's not altogether clear, I'm sure it wasn't to them, why this particular approach was commanded. Yeah? Well, it doesn't matter. We don't always understand why we are in a certain situation or why God makes certain demands of us. We simply obey, trusting that God knows what he's doing. Do you believe God knows what he's doing? Of course we do, yes. So then simply take him on his word. Obey. That's why he says, is it in Samuel, obedience is better than sacrifice. Yeah, he wants your heart, and that requires trust. It requires letting go of self and all the worries that we have of you know, what's going on here, I'm not sure, and you know what I mean. And letting go and saying, I trust you've got it in hand. You know, it will work out. All things will work together for good.